It's all fun and games until you have Vulcan Jesus in your brain. It's feature, please. A heinous trip at Warp 5. My name is Joseph.
Move over, Al. There's a new hologram in town. I'm your co-host, Peter.
One quick note before we start, Peter. We haven't said in a bit. We have a lot of lovely theme music that we've had through the years.
Very excited we got to pull out the old...
The Voyager one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you haven't been on our Patreon, get on it. There's a couple episodes there exclusive to our Patreon right now. One is a review of kind of a cult classic film both you and I love, and we just randomly decided to review for Halloween and Event Horizon. And then we also did a review of mostly of the 2 Vix episode of Lower Decks, but then kind of reviewed the whole season, and we got to use our old Voyager theme song for that. So we got to use the Inner Light, which we use for our Patreon episodes. We got to use the Voyager theme. You just heard the Enterprise theme, and all of those are produced by Ian and Sarah. So thank you to them. You know, we just always like to make sure we shout them out every once in a while. And with that in mind, Peter, what episode of Enterprise did we watch this week?
We got into season 4, episode 8, Awakening. This guy first aired on the 26th of November, 2004, written by Andre Baramis, who I believe is a co-producer at this point.
I believe so.
Directed by old Roxanne Dawson. Your place to find all things sweaty and sensual. This is going to be...
And cum related.
Yes.
As we
forever.
all...
This is going to be Roxanne Dawson's final directorial involvement in Star Trek, I believe.
Yeah. Good note to land on, I think. Overall, this is the middle part of a 3-part story. This does have a bit of middle child syndrome in that it doesn't have a real beginning and it doesn't have a real end, but tells a lot of story in it. And, you know, I think that if it had, I really like this episode. I really like all of season 4. I mean, we've basically said that a lot already as we've reviewed this. But if this one has a weakness, it is that it gives you more plot, right? Like you thought you were getting all the plot like that you were going to get in the first episode, and then in this one they're like, what if it's also the Andorians, right? Like what if all of this crazy Vulcan shit is not enough? And we've got to bring it all in, right?
I really like that, though.
Okay.
That escalation. Well, I mean, we'll get to it at the end. At the beginning, though, I want to give a shout out to the recap.
Yeah,
which normally
very tight,
tight, and maybe it's the story itself that there's not like that little throwaway scene that's going to come back and be like, oh, turns out this is the fucking linchpin to the whole thing. And wow, that, they always spoil when there's one of those, they focus in on you like, well, okay, obviously that
happened a lot in season 3, right?
Yeah,
where it would just flash back to the things that are going to be really important.
Okay. That wobbly table leg, that's going to turn out to be the villain. Right.
Right.
It was a good, tight recap that did a nice job of broadly reminding you of everything that's going on without overly focusing and ruining any of the story. The Battlestar Galactica school of ruining the fucking episode with ridiculous recaps, or not even
recaps, just like showing you scenes from the episode to the point where you had to look away. You would be like, all right, it's time not to look at the screen.
I did. I would cover my eyes and I would cover my ears like a child in a scary movie. And then my wife would push me when it was ready to go. The only thing I could explain for that in Battlestar Galactica is cocaine. Nothing else makes sense.
Well, we start with something that does make sense. And that is Saval getting chewed out by his bosses. Because when we last left Saval, he decided that it would be a great idea to mind meld with a brain damaged human and then brag about it. Which, was like telling your boss, I fucked a dog and I liked it. Okay. In this.
Oh, hello, manager. Did you know that today I took all of the money out of the cash register and put it in my backpack? Oh, I have to go see HR. Well, guess what? That's what I wanted this entire time. I love it when a plan comes together. The intro, these shots of what Vulcan looks like, um, again, very like 90s Westwood CGI.
Yeah, it feels like I'm about to play Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun.
Actually, you know what? It feels like, because it's so red. It's funny how all of this stuff just hangs out in LucasArts territory, but this feels like some dark forces.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah. Yes, it
There's a real
does.
dark forces to the they're not matte paintings, they're clearly CG. That's fine. That's great. That's dandy. But when you go inside Vulcan High Command, if you thought the soccer arena where they gave John Archer his You Save the World award,
Base at Bay Stadium.
the Vulcan High Command, I would put their headquarters on an opulence level equal to a failing mall food court. And the worst part
Been
of
in
it,
my share of those. Okay.
all it's missing is a Sabraro, right?
Right.
Sabaro. And then there's this, and I'm air quoting here, a window overlooking the skyline. I thought at first it was bad CGI. I think it's just a low resolution printout of the skyline. It is so fucking terrible. I'm surprised they let the cameras anywhere near this thing.
They definitely saved their money for other effects later on in the episode.
And
Uh,
ultimately, they don't need to really put a lot into the set because the acting and the plot is there to keep your attention on it.
Even like Roxanne made the right choice in like doing a lot of close-ups, right? There's a lot of close talking, a lot of close-ups in this episode because if you're like, okay, don't have a lot of money for sets, don't have a lot of money to do anything fancy, so let's crowd all of that out of the shot and put our actors, you know, in frame and let them work their craft, right? Like let's go with what we've got, and it works. And in this teaser scene when Saval is up there trying to get a read on the rest of the Vulcan High Command and talk about what happened, these are all Vulcans, right? They're all dialed in. They're all kind of tight-lipped. They're all restrained. And so it's interesting to kind of read the emotion in the room. Velas, who we know is like president of Vulcan, is definitely taking Saval down, right? Like
I love his voice, by the way.
yeah, the actor is really good at playing this character. Robert Foxworth. He
He
was
played an
also
admiral in
DS9. He was Admiral Layton, and he was great in that role too. And his voice really carried that role as well.
what's happening in this intro is them setting in stone. Vulcans are kind of evil, and shit's real fucked up. Maybe I've given them a pass because Archer was so deep in the weeds being petulant, like, man, I hate Vulcans. You hurt my dad's feelings, or, whatever the thrust of his argument was that kind of drowns out what the truth of the matter might be. But this all makes it crystal clear that there are very bad actors in power at the highest seats of Vulcan civilization. And Suval's play here to get in front of the council, and I think his hope was like, maybe there's a couple people that aren't corrupt as fuck that I might be able to communicate this to. It's a solid play, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
expose my mind meld. I'm going to get an audience with the highest court possible. I will try to plead my case, and he gets in there, and Velas, just exactly what you said. It's a kangaroo court. He barely gets a chance to talk. Suval's a smart guy. He sees the writing on the wall immediately. I love the play that Velas makes where he's like, we're sticking to the story. The Seer Knights?
Mhm.
Seer Knights are the bad guys. They planted the bomb. No, it was Stell, the chief of security. You're right, it was Stell. Hey, turns out he's a Cyrenite. Our our conspiracy holds true. Stell, by the way, would we call him Detective Guilty?
Detective Guilty, yes.
This dude's name, the actor's name, was Lark Spies. What a
Damn.
bad guy, character actor, if I ever heard one. Yeah, we arrested him, and I wonder if that's just a hey, listen, man, we're gonna shoot you off, and you're gonna go chill out over here for a while, or if Voss is dirty enough where he's like, sorry, bro, you got to die for the cause.
Yeah, it's just very. I'm going to count that as a bit of a criticism as well. I like that they did that they threw that guy under the bus immediately. But when we had the scene on Enterprise and he fingered him, there was a lot of just, how dare you? This is inadmissible. This is nonsense. They'll be hell to pay because you've committed this terrible taboo in our society by doing a mind meld to begin with. And then here we are, cut to this scene, and it's like, yeah, okay, so you were totally right, and we've arrested him, and he was totally a Cyrenite, so we're still okay.
Yeah, but
No discussion of like, just like, oh, we just bus rolled this guy off camera, and we've decided this is where the plot is now. That's a little sloppy.
I agree with it, though. You know, you and I have played games where there's just nasty cutthroat politics. Again, Voss is not a stupid guy.
Yeah.
He sees there's loose ends. He sees that Suval might be able to make a case on this. And like, that's the most Machiavellian thing there is, okay, our dude got pinched and we're just going to stab him in the back and reinforce our case even more. Great.
I just wanted to see that. I like the move. I just didn't get to see it. They just were like, yeah, by the way, that happened. I'm like, whoa, wow, really? That's how they clean that up?
Listen,
forgot that.
They're on a budget. You think they just got that Lark Spies money laying around?
No, you can only hire Detective Guilty for one episode.
I'm, and it's TV and you got to. I was surprised that Voss didn't have Suval in handcuffs by the end of this. But by the end of the scene, we start to establish that there is at least one pair of sympathetic pointy ears still on that council. And I don't think this dude ever gets a name, but Roxanne Dawson does a great job of having this guy visible through all of Voss's tyranny, just kind of hanging over his shoulder, kind of like not okay with what's happening in that high chamber.
Yeah, his name is Kuvak. And he is
great grandfather of Tuvok.
And
Tuvok's much cooler grandfather. I don't know.
He definitely serves that role of the voice of reason that you want in those scenes, as Voss does increasingly more unhinged and evil stuff. And like you said, he gets framed up very nicely as that role and is used very effectively in that. But Suval gets fired as ambassador immediately.
I like the term melder.
Yeah, but like the pejorative nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, when after they're done kind of cashiering him, they also say, like, you still have to be silent. And that there's apparently whatever the penalty is for violating that, it's extremely stiff. And Suval concludes with saying, like, there's much to say, Your Excellency, but no one is listening. And nice, perfect line to leave that scene on and cut to credits and begin with the rest of the plot.
Of course, where we wanted to pick up was on Archer and T'Pol wandering into the Siren camp and getting swarmed. We didn't really talk about it last episode. So was that a holographic wall, or was that like magic?
What? Well, I mean, it's revealed in this episode that it was holographic, right? Because we see it get busted.
So the Forge is a place where technology doesn't work except for a massive holographic field.
My assumption is that this is ancient technology because everything in this area is ancient. I mean, we're going to find out a lot about the Forge and what it is and why it is the way it is as the episode goes on. But they don't explain it, right? There's a holographic field there. Why? Yeah, it doesn't matter, right? Like, there is one. It is a refuge. They hide there. This is
Because if there's
technology we
one
know that.
thing that is always in Scott Bakula's presence, it's holograms.
It's true. It's true. And we see that T'Pau, who we saw a photo of before as the leader of the Searnites, is present. T'Pau is a very interesting name to choose for this because it was not accidental. Did you watch any original series, Trek?
I know her from, I think I'm thinking of a Romulan. I read about T'Pau when I was looking up T'Pol because there was a Romulan card in the Decipher CCG that also had a very similar name, and I ended up reading about all three of them.
And T'Pau shows up in the original series in Amok Time, in that episode when Spock has the Ponfar. They introduce all of that, and he goes to have his wedding, and this is the old Vulcan who's like overseeing the Caliphate is T'Pau. This is the same character, and so this
I'm
is
guessing
her.
She's not quite as attractive as she is here.
Yes, perhaps a bit more mileage on her by then, but she's very young here, and I like this idea though of let's try to bridge the gap because Vulcans are super long lived, right? So if we have a young Vulcan, this Vulcan can be an old Vulcan we introduced in the original series. Like, okay, perfect.
Sure.
She is portrayed as being a super big deal in the original series, so that also works.
So here's what I can tell you about the Searnites. They don't like two things, and that would namely be showers and brushes. And this serves as a very stark contrast to, what do we want to call mainstream Vulcans at this point?
They are very technocratic.
Technocratic.
They are very.
But I mean, what'd you call them? The non-believers. The
No, not non-believers. They're more secular. They're more non-theistic. Like, they obviously believe in logic and they give lip service to the teachings of Sirach in abstract, but they're not orthodox, right? I think actually Judaism is the religion that probably has the best way to describe it. If the Sironites are orthodox, then normal Vulcans are reformed. Like in this era.
We commented early, Broken Bow, I believe, the wardrobe of the secular Vulcans seemed very Japanese inspired, kimono-y. There was some heavy cultural crimping there, I think, with this imperialist.
Yeah, complete with lanyards. Can't forget him.
The lanyards. I thought about, what was the Action Grandpa episode called?
First Flight.
For as much of a piece of shit as that episode was, the mileage I got out of First Flight over the past two episodes in terms of Trip's conversations with Suval were huge because they've got nasty history back in First Flight,
Mm-hmm.
And this one, things change quite a bit, but the secular Vulcans, very clean, very proud, maybe superficial to a certain extent in terms of ornamentation and appearance, versus these guys that are just like dirty hippies. They're filthy, they're spiritual, they're dirt people.
They're identifiably Vulcan. It's not like they're like emotional, right? They are still very the gain is way down, but there's a bit more freedom in expression, right? There's a bit more balance. And I think that distinction was perfectly executed. And it goes not just to the way that they portray themselves, but like you said, their dress. And when T'Pau says, like, yeah, I'm the person you're looking for, Archer's like, oh, I want to bring you to justice. And she's like, that's stupid. I haven't left this desert in 2 years. It definitely didn't blow up your damn embassy. And of course, who should also enter the chat but T'Pol's mother, who we knew is present from, I guess it was Koss telling her, but Telas kind of, hi, how you guys doing? Yeah, they got here because I gave my daughter a hint as to how to find us.
By hint, I
And
mean a holographic map.
and yeah, they relate also that they met Arev, the other Vulcan, during the journey, and that he had died in the process.
A rev being a big deal because we're going to quickly reveal that he, in fact, was carrying the Katra, which is the spirit, for all intents and purposes, of Surak.
Correct. So I know there's some other things that happen on Enterprise. Let's talk about this first, though, because it's very interesting.
Well, before we go deeper on this, I'm holding these two different camps of Vulcans, right? Which is essentially the Surak empowered good Vulcans versus the evil,
the Orthodox Vulcans versus the Reformed Vulcans.
In terms of portrayal on screen and behavior, which do you think we see more of in later Star Trek in terms of attitude? Because it feels like they started filming this, which is again the last of the Berman properties, and they said, let's look at the way that Tuvok had been played, and we're going to use that because Tuvok is a good Vulcan, right?
Yeah.
Tuvok's a complete character. Tuvok's a boring character, but if you're going to bring people in to play bit parts as Vulcans, and you're going to say, sit down and watch these episodes, this is how it is to act, I have to think that Tim Russ's portrayal of Tuvok is there.
Sure.
Right? And I think
and
that was very...
too, yeah. I mean, famously so.
Right. So, like, I think that that's probably how they initially established these Vulcan high command guys that were involved with Starfleet. And it's hard looking back to say, okay, that's the old Vulcan mindset, and then these Surak guys are going to come in and change the cultural landscape and kind of reform all of Vulcan. But I don't really see these Syrian guys reflected in the way that like Tuvok or anything out of Next Gen really felt.
I think you definitely see it in Next Gen, not so much because there just wasn't much Vulcan content.
Yeah, it was like Susie Plaxton.
Yeah. But for Tuvok, he's very intensely spiritual. He mind melds all the time. He's meditating all the time. We have a whole episode about his backstory of how he was able to tame his emotions through basically a Vulcan Jedi sensei who
they prayed the emotion away,
who helps him rein it in.
What's that called? The Korra?
The Kolinar.
Yeah.
But he's extremely strict because he's a tactical officer. He's a more militarized Vulcan. So I think that's more what you see in his personality, and that, he's not a scientist. He's not somebody with a lot of soft skills. He's somebody with a lot of practical skills. So I think it still fits. But there is a sense of retroactive continuity here, right? Like, you are trying to make it work in retrospect. And I think they do a good job, though, with the visuals we're talking about and the spiritual versus non-spiritual, and showing like that is something that re-entered Vulcan society more recently and as a consequence of humans than something that they had access to. So, but yeah, the thing that becomes very important is that Archer has the spirit of Surak, who is Vulcan Jesus, in his mind.
Move over Al. Move over Johnny Silverhand.
We got Surak in the house.
We got Johnny Surrock hand.
I really love this part of the story. That Surak. First, I love how Surak's portrayed. Right, you want to talk about somebody who's very in touch with emotion in a way that we're not used to Vulcans in a subtle fashion. Right, everything he says is very like reflective, and it's very emotionally aware, but still tight.
I'm guessing this guy sat down and prepped for this character by watching Mr. Rogers. That's the vibe I got off of him.
A little bit, yeah. More mournful, maybe, but I see what you're saying. But it works. I like that he says, like, Archer says, "Who are you?" And he says, "You know who I am."
Say my name.
I'm not going to bother engaging with a question that you already know the answer to. And I love that the first vision that he has of him, you see from his perspective the final like battles between the Vulcans who eventually become the Romulans under the Raptor's wings.
Yeah, I like that.
And the Vulcans who, were trying to embrace logic and that it's resorting to nuclear weapons. And that's why they're in this blasted desert hellscape where technology doesn't work. It's like, okay, the backstory here is making a lot of sense now.
The interesting thing about Surak is that he is not a memory. This isn't Archer reliving moments as a third-party witness. Surak is alive and conscious in his head. They're having discussions that are based on changing situations outside of Archer's head. And, Archer doesn't have truly Al from Quantum Leap standing there walking through walls and stuff, but under traumatic circumstances, which Archer is rewarded with several times in this episode. I mean, how lucky for him. What a great reward for all the great work he's been doing to have a Vulcan hottie inflict that kind of head trauma with this botched ritual coming down.
He is experiencing new levels of head trauma, like psychic head trauma now, right? Like he truly, his brain is so scarred that this is the only way he can feel anything. And it's good. It's good he's had the opportunity. But I do love just where we're at with Archer's story at this point. Let's take stock, right? Like of what this plot's saying. We've got Archer who hates Vulcans. He likes 2 Vulcans ever. One of them just recently. And now he's got the most important Vulcan ever to have existed soul in his body. And he knows this and he believes it, right?
Right.
You've got Trip.
And that most important soul for whom the entire spirit of Vulcan rests wants to be there.
Yes. Chooses to remain with Archer. That he has to be the one that helps save the Vulcan society from itself. Which, like, holy shit, right? Like, what a choice. What a move. You got Trip, who's presently in charge of Enterprise, who is like balls deep in getting into a shooting war with Vulcans over a conspiracy to blow up Earth's embassy. Right? Like Vulcans were the ones that allowed Earth to like recover from their own nuclear holocaust and their own self-destruction and forge a new path into the stars. And here's Commander Trip Tucker, who's like, yeah, let's start shooting at these Vulcan ships because we're going to fuck around with their politics because our captain's down there trying to find out what the conspiracy is that's leading to this bombing that cost us our boss's life. To be fair,
though, he's got Saval standing there over his shoulder saying,
do it. Yeah.
You're in the right.
Costs. Yeah.
Maybe they'll get into it next episode, but the fact that Trip, who is usually pretty good at being a critical or like a critic and good at being a pessimist, second maybe to Reed, who is also there watching all of this happen. Like, you've just found out that High Command has blown up the Earth embassy, killed your boss, who your boss's boss that he sometimes talked to. In Trip's case, a personal friend, Admiral Forrest. The fact that at no point they're like not putting two and two together and being like, this is why these guys didn't fucking help us out with the Zindi threat. Like, they are bad guys. They want to. Blowing up our embassy was nothing. They were banking on us all just being fucking killed. Like, this is huge. This is a big deal.
They blew up our embassy to justify a domestic crackdown. They don't care what had happened, right? Like, it was just a means to an end.
Yeah, but
And
listen, man, if I was in there, I'd be like, they want us dead.
oh,
They
they don't care. That's even worse, right? Like, you're disposable. You're it, and this happened right after Earth saved Vulcan as a consequence of stopping the Zindi crisis. So
right.
trips in the middle of this. I mean, this is the same show where Archer didn't want to apologize for his dog peeing on shit, right? Like, I know it's probably a low blow to keep bringing up a night in sick bay, but man, if only they had learned after the first season that they needed to bring in this young blood and that they had good ideas.
Well, what's interesting too, there's a lot in this episode that should kind of feel Mary Sue-ish, like, oh, here's Archer, the great white knight, and the Vulcans can only trust this human, the hero. I don't get that feeling, and I don't know if it's writing. I don't know if it's Bakula's portrayal. Um, he's not reluctant to do this stuff. Like, he meets the challenges that the Vulcan plotline sets in front of him, like, head on.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like he's saving the day, and it doesn't feel like he's pulling magic out of his ass. It's just like, there's a situation that I can't change, and the only way to resolve it is going through it, and I'll roll with the punches. And I guess part of that is that Archer at this point has seen so much zany shit that, like, his mind's eye is pretty elastic at this point.
Yeah, he definitely accepts the idea of Saval being in his, or rather, of Surak being in his head pretty readily, right? He's just
And why wouldn't you?
immediately.
You've dealt with space ghosts already, and after all the bullshit with the stupid temporal Cold War, I love the call out in this scene. Uh, T'Pol's the doubting Thomas in this, and like, oh, come on, you don't believe that the most important Vulcan in the world is living as a spirit in your head. Here's case studies where we actually tried to mind meld with like Jedi holocrons with
Katra in them, yeah.
Katras, and Archer's just like, yeah, and listen, the Vulcan science, throwing that interface with the Vulcan Science Academy doesn't believe in time travel either. Which,
but we definitely did it though. You and me both. We both went to fucking Detroit. We were there. We dealt with some disgusting man who really liked hamburgers.
like, it's almost getting Janeway levels of like, this is just another fucking kooky Thursday, man. Like, just roll with the punches. You fight the punches, you get them below the shoulders. That's not sexy. You roll with them, you take a couple good head wounds, blow your load, and before you know it, you're into Friday, and there's the weekend.
As mentioned, Trip and Saval are doing their scheming on Enterprise, trying to find a way to deal with this present situation. Their plot doesn't kick off till later, really. The action remains on the surface.
I like that the Vulcan hippie commune temple has a jail.
It does. Has a handy little jail cell where, as you mentioned, T'Pol tries to convince Archer that he's doesn't have a Vulcan soul in his body. But T'Pau is convinced once he tells her like what he's experienced, and she does a mind meld. It doesn't take her but a few seconds to be like, yeah, he's totally got him in there. That's true. T'Pau hates humans, by the way. That's very clear. Very disdainful of humans and their emotions. Mostly, she seems disdainful of them because they're allied with the government that she doesn't feel is legitimate. But there's almost a sort of a lesson that she has to learn through Archer's actions that I think Surak is basically passive aggressively making her learn.
Yeah, and Also, this reminds me of Shadows of Pajem, and that's when Suval, or no, it was that captain like leads like the Black Ops strike team in because there was that colony that the puppet government had a relationship with Vulcan High Command, but it was against the will of the rest of the native population. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah, and then it's the Andorians ended up having a Bill Archer out.
Lots of good. The Vulcan government is shady. Um, Plot lines coming into clear focus with this one. Like when even Vulcan's own population is disdainful of High Command and Starfleet because of its relationship to High Command. Um, to Paul's mom, I don't. She's so emotional, and I think the actress is really focused on I'm a mom over I'm a Vulcan.
I agree. Yeah.
It's a problem. Like she's a great mom. She would be a great like the mom from Drop Dead Fred, where it's just like emotionally abusive and like borderline twisted upbringing. That's great for a human mom. For a Vulcan mom, it's missing a couple marks.
I feel like it's just missing a little bit. Like in the end, you hear from Tillis about her motivations and that she's doing what she's doing for T'Pol. I feel like like it needed to be like a family burden of like, I know how much I've struggled with my emotions. I've seen in your eyes how much you've struggled with your
Yes.
emotions. So I didn't just do this for me. I did it for you too, so that I could find a way for both of us. I feel like that was the only thing that was missing because that
That
could
would
have
have been a
that would have explained why she is the way she is.
that would have been a cool if they had more time to really explore this stuff. If there would have been a fissure in the entirety of Vulcan society where logic itself is not enough to sustain the Vulcan psyche. There needs to be the spiritual component, and that they had been running on pure logic without that spirituality, and that it was causing emotional fracturing or
Right.
something off, and that you were seeing like a moral decay or some sort of a visible like society is falling apart. There is a leg to this society that is missing, and it is this religious and it's
And
this
that makes a lot of sense with what we've already learned because we found out that Vulcan society was more aligned with what the Sirenites would approve of until such time that the technocrats and the reform Vulcans started to have more purchase over society because High Command ran space travel. And then that became more important in their society, and they used their authority over that to usurp more authority over all of Vulcan. And that's how the sort of religious element of their belief structure started to fall away and was replaced by a more practical worldview. And yeah, like you said, like I feel like Surrak's basically saying that part's super important because it's a channel for your emotional needs. Because we still have emotions and we still have emotional needs. The idea is Surak says, okay, you can't go buck wild with him anymore. You have to rein it in. You have to restrain it. You have to have discipline. You have to have these this rote teaching that you can apply to doing that. But you still are a person that has this sort of spiritual element to you. And we have these powers, these psychic powers, essentially low level psychic
on
powers
top of our amazing strength.
that allow us to sort of commune with each other on a mental level. And we have to fold that in and to nurture that part of you, or you're going to become unhinged, unfocused, because just logic is not enough, like you're saying. And I that's all there, and I don't
We're
think
corrupt.
they didn't ever put it together that way.
Yeah, I think whether it's the entire civilization in a sick spot where you're having emotional breakdown, or which her mom was suffering, or yeah, like there is just a genetic predisposition to emotional distress, and her mom suffering it as well. And that would have been a strong bonding point. Like, I never exposed it to you. It feels a little retconny having her turning out to be a secret cultist, but it works. Whatever.
So on Enterprise, Trip and Saval hatch a plan. They're going to hack a satellite, shut it down for 6 minutes using Saval's like super secret tech codes.
It's Desert Crossing all over again.
And then they're going to fly a modified shuttle that's going to be able to function inside the forge despite its anti-tech aura by doing manual piloting with Travis behind the wheel.
This is the guy that's never spent any real time in atmosphere and wind and flying stuff. I don't know if the Boomer is the right guy to have on a stick and rudder aircraft.
And Trip is a bit surprised that Saval is like, okay, like, I never got the impression over all of these years you so much really cared for Earth or humans. So what gives? Why are you caring so much now? What is this? And Saval explains, like, I spent 30 years on your planet. I have an affinity for humans. And Trip says, you hide it really well. And he just like suddenly stiffens and he goes, thank you.
Very deep compliment. I love
Yeah,
it.
like, okay, I appreciate that. Like,
is it
I did hide
retconning?
it.
Is this a character arc that they had, scripted out for Suval the entire time? I don't know. It works. Gary Graham pulls it off great. I love Suval and Trip as a dynamic duo. I like the big reveal that Suval is super into humans. You can look back on stuff and be like, man, like, did he really like Archer? Was he really willing to like make a peace inroads with the Andorians with humans help, blah, blah, blah. Like, on one hand, him always being real sour to the experience makes great sense for a guy who is a seasoned spy and knows that he has a lot of secrets he needs to hide, from being a melder to being a human sympathizer, knowing that your boss is scummy and you've got these traits you need to hide. So of course you're just going to go hard the other way and just be the bad guy. I don't know. It works. I love it. They shoot the pod out. And the big plan here is that Vulcan High Command, they know from aerial reconnaissance that the Searnites are in this encampment. They can't precision strike them. They don't want to send in ground troops. So Suval's just like, fuck it, nuke it from orbit.
You mean Velas, not Saval. Saval's the good guy.
Sorry, Velas. Nuke it from orbit. Photon torpedo the entire fucking area. We're going to spray and pray. We're going to be done with this shit. Again, there's Doubting Thomas on the council who's like, this seems real bad. Oh, no,
yeah,
no.
Dude, boss. Do you sure you want to drone strike the wedding? Like, just because the terrorist is there, right?
It's a great, the way that they're running the Surak throwbacks, like, you're seeing it happen again. It's Vulcans bombing other Vulcans. But Vlost can't do this while Enterprise is observing. So he starts pulling strings at Starfleet's like, get them out of there. Some other new admiral tells Trip, hey, get out. And Trip's pushing back and saying, no. This is the only rickety part of the episode for me, is that Vlost would be so sloppy as to feel like he absolutely has to strike that place right now, and that he's going to do it the exact moment that Enterprise flies out.
I mean, you have to create some sort of tension and ticking clock, right?
Yeah, but these guys are so patient and rational and like well metered on everything else that like him having this flimsy, it's a drop in the bucket of some of the bigger ramrod crimes we've seen, but it's there. They block the satellite. They drop the ship down. They're going to go find the captain. They're going to go find T'Pol. Soon as that shuttlecraft gets in the atmosphere, Vulcan fighter jets start tagging it with phasers, and basically the jig is up.
They get found out, and then they wind up in a very well CG animated firefight with 3 Vulcan ships. A lot of, I guess, the effects money for this trilogy went into these shots. Looks good. But obviously the NX-01 is got 0 shot against 3 Vulcans. They just say that straight up, like, no way, cannot win. And ultimately, Saval tells Trip, we have to retreat. We have no choice. Just dying here does us no good. And they leave. Back on the surface, T'Pau, it wants the Katra out of Archer's head now that she's convinced that it's there. And has a ritual that she's studied in order to take it, but it could imperil Archer's life to do so. But she has decided, I'm taking it. I want Archer to submit to it, but I'll take it by force if I have to, because can't let the dirty human have Vulcan Jesus. And Teles is against this because she sees, like, oh God, my daughter is not going to be okay with you doing that to her boss. That's just not, I know her. She's not going to like that. We can't do this. But over her objections, T'Pau says, we're doing it, goes in, says essentially that to Archer. T'Pau is aghast at what could potentially be Archer's death from doing this, but Archer actually says, I'm down. Don't want it in my head. Let's give this a try.
The surprise in this episode for me is that T'Pau's mom does not end up becoming the new leader of the Sirenites. I really thought they were grooming her to be the true voice that would lead the Vulcans forward, because T'Pau, right? Yeah, T'Pau.
Mm-hmm. T'Pau.
Everything in this episode paints her as, like, you know, the unfit underling who assumes command. She's too rigid. The empathy's not there. I thought that T'Pau's mom was going to be like the more reasonable voice that would come out on top by the end, maybe even get the Katra in her head next. It's not the way it shakes out, though. Yeah, T'Pau botches the ritual. She doesn't botch the ritual. Serac just doesn't want out. Serac's got a plan. He fights to stay in Archer's head. It fucks Archer up pretty good. He gets a couple more conversations with Serac. He gets to kind of see how Serac dies, which is radiation poisoning because of the nuclear war.
I mean, it is kind of interesting to really understand that Vulcans are a post-apocalyptic society, right? Like that's what they are.
Speaking of
Earth
Fallout,
Earth is too, but like the Vulcans are legitimately from a terrible post-apocalyptic society where barely anything was left and they had to rebuild themselves. And that means that Vulcan Jesus just died of radiation poisoning because of all the
these
nukes.
are Vulcans that had already reached space travel too.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously for the Romulans to leave and go become their own thing, they had to be very advanced. As Archer comes out of that last visit with Serac, he has a new quest objective. He's got a new mission, and that is to find the doodad that will unite Vulcan. And they know that they're about to start getting bombed by high command photon torpedoes, and the order is given to evacuate the compound. But Archer's like, no, we got to go down this doorway over here that for some reason nobody's ever walked down.
It's
all
cleverly hidden.
People in this place. The Vulcans, they're not a curious race. They have space travel, but they don't explore. They have a desert compound, but no one has ever bothered to go down that one door inside the prison area.
Listen, they might have the space elf ears, but they don't have the +2 to detecting secret doors. Okay.
It's not a secret door. It's just a fucking door.
It is just a door. Maybe that's why they weren't able to detect it. Just failed the spot roll every time they rolled by.
This is the jail,
never
right?
saw it.
This is the jail, right? Well, here's a door that we're going to put people in. What's that door over there? I don't know. Nobody would ever go down that door.
How had been searching it for 2 years, like obviously not very well.
Yeah.
So, like,
it's 5 minutes down the way over there.
They don't really explain what the Kir'Shara is in this episode. They did mention it in the prior episode, this is a mythical artifact that has the original teachings of Serac in it, which we know from the prior episode is something that was lost, and that there's been all this reinterpretation, right? Like T'Pau gives the backstory very early on.
Jedi holocrons, yes, we know.
And so this is the Jedi holocron that has like the actual like writings of Vulcan Jesus direct from the source.
I love in this episode the amount of callback that Pajem gets
Yeah.
in reinforcing that Pajem was a big fucking deal, that Sirach had materials there, I believe.
They found all of those Katras there, I
Mm-hmm.
believe that they mentioned it in the first episode about how it had been defiled, right? That was a Vulcan spiritual place with monks who treated all of that very seriously, and then this technocratic government turned it into a fucking spy, you know, a spy
Caused a
base.
big rift with the native population of Vulcan, and also created extra layers of antagonism in the relationship with Andoria. Like
Right.
that's a double L there.
It's like turning the Vatican into, a CIA black ops, place.
Yeah,
Like,
it's the
it's like,
new
what is this?
waterboarding facility.
Yeah.
Um, they start getting bombed. Archer gets the team down there. It's T'Pau, T'Pol, Archer. T'Pol's mom is part of the evacuation crew. Uh, they're walking down. There's Vulcan mummies standing up. Apparently, Vulcan hair lasts forever.
Doesn't go away.
No. Uh, Archer is clearly, there's more brain bleed between him and Sirach, where he's able, like, oh, it's Larry. He used to make really great cookies on Vulcan Christmas. How would you know that, Captain? That's not on the sign anywhere. Gets down. They
It's
find a big vault door. He knows which markers, what scribbles to push his hands on, like when you're a little kid and you're opening the secret door and you're like just fucking touching markings and twisting around.
he collected all the keys to in Raccoon City to his police department or whatever, and already
Not even,
he's
man.
played through this before.
Not even. There aren't moving pieces here. He's just touching markings on the wall and like making noises and stuff like, Captain, what are you doing? And then the door opens up and there's a incense burner in there.
So they get the Kirishara, and they're very happy about this, and they attempt their escape. And of course, this is when the bombardment begins. But T'Pau, and Archer escape. Everything seems to be fine, albeit with, I think, T'Pau having like a leg injury or something.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, though, Teles had stayed behind because she was worried about her daughter. And they find her buried and critically wounded in the rubble. And that is when we have a tearful farewell for Teles as she conveys that she joined the Serenites to try and find help for T'Pol, because apparently T'Pol had always had problems containing her emotions, and she was trying to find a way to solve that. Again, I think that would have been massively helped by making it something that Teles shared with T'Pol, that they both had that problem.
And
And
that was
then
before she started smoking space crack.
Yeah. Now, God, right? Like all those space rocks you smoked, man.
The mother's mishandled the whole way through. Like, give her that thing where the doorway is collapsing and the mom reappears and like sacrifices herself by holding the door open, and then she gets pinned down, and like,
yeah, there was nothing redemptive about her death. It was just sad, which missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Not that she needed redemption. She just
She
needed to do
does, though,
something.
because she had like, there's even the scene in there when she's like, I know you went into that shitty marriage just for me, and it probably would have been cool if I would have told you that, like, I was realistically being persecuted because I'm a cultist. Like, her mom's pretty shitty, and we're talking about early 2000s, 90s TV. Like, these are heroes. Give them those fucking heroic arcs. Have the mom redeem herself by sacrifice. If that was her dad, well, I don't know. I would say if that was her dad would have been like holding the rubble open, sacrificing himself. But when we jump to the fucking Hansons, 7 and 9's dad, ugh, he never redeems himself by clobbering the Borg queen over the head to give her a chance to escape like he should have. How did the Sirenites on the surface know that Enterprise was fighting with Vulcan ships in orbit? Are Vulcan eyes just really good and they can see out of outer space?
Yeah, they don't exactly explain that, do they? They just know it. I
They're
guess
fighting up there. Oh, how do you know? Do you have a way to talk? Because if you could talk to my ship, they could have told me that they've got evidence that you guys didn't do. We could have like cut 40 minutes off this whole
just needed
fucking
a
thing.
guy with a telescope in the background, right? Like that's all.
They also weren't really clear that the shuttle had returned, because by the time Enterprise zips off, my impression was that the shuttle was not recovered, and that eventually Archer was probably going to meet up with Reed, Mayweather, and the shuttle.
They said
And
they
that's
had
how
to abort, so I mean, kind of
they
said
just
it.
didn't do the special effects to show it flying back into the bay. To Paul, full on crying as her mom dies. Again,
A single tear, but still there.
Trillium D is clearly still having that long-term impact on her. They fly off back on Enterprise. Suval really lays the full implication out of what's happening, that the Sirenites need to go because they represent a threat to high command in pacifism, and pacifism is not going to be in vogue because high command wants to go to war with Andoria. That Velas has gotten the entire council on board with launching a preemptive strike because there's a belief that they are using Xindi weapons that will be turned against Vulcan, that will imperil both of those planets, as well as most likely dragging Earth into that conflict as well. So you thought the stakes were high before. We just took it up to 11.
First last order Trip gives is go to Andoria. We have time to raise the stakes and bring in Jeffrey Combs.
Yes. In
Let's
case of
go.
emergency, break class, get the comb out.
Yeah. I mean, no emergencies here. This was still very good. I would say like this is probably the worst episode we've watched in a few weeks, but still not bad. You know, like
this is great. I gotta update my
very
list.
Good.
I'm there for it. I mean,
yeah. This is the first one I think I could really feel like there were flaws. Like the entire Augments trilogy, I really don't feel like they did anything single misstep in any of that, except for like Persis' like not staying on the ship was a little thin. It's like that is how nitpicky I would have to go to find flaws here. Here, Teleste wasn't super well handled. There was just some missing elements, things that didn't quite put together for you that I feel like needed to be, but still, this is great, right? Like so much good Vulcan content about like a key Trek race that you just never got to see.
Right.
And now they're really bringing it to life, and it really works.
We got more though, because we're going to be going into season 4, episode 9, Kashara. That's going to be written by Mike Sussman. Oh, hey, Dave Livingston. We haven't heard from him in a while. T'Pol and Archer endeavor to expose an ancient Vulcan artifact to Vulcan society, while Enterprise becomes involved in a standoff between the Vulcans and the Andorian fleets.
I feel like David Livingston did the first episode in the Augments, so he's been around recently.
That's like 8 episodes ago for us, man.
For us, yeah. But yeah, we're going to continue. We're going to finish off this trilogy of episodes, and we're going to, I think we have at least one off, maybe 2 one-offs in a row after this. And then we go into another trilogy, and then the Klingon duology. Like, we're cranking, man. We're cranking. Content's good. We're going to keep rolling. So, thanks for listening to V'ger Please. We'll see you next week.